All right, now we are recording and go ahead and start the admittance if you'd like, John. It's noon. Hello, everyone.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Just give me a second here. I'm going to uh, text Bridget. Okay. So I'd like to welcome you to another Green Hour, Wake, Bake, and Educate. Today we are featuring Mary Jane Bordon, or MJ, as she likes to be called. Great initials, by the way. She is an accomplished communications and information professional author, an artist, advocate, and activist in the cannabis industry. And she is also involved in the reform policies that have come across in the last few years, as well as education. So first, I'd like to welcome you, MJ, and I want to start off by asking a question that usually brings some pretty interesting answers. So what was your first experience with cannabis, and what led you to the path into the cannabis industry?
Well, Bridget and everyone at the Cleveland School of Cannabis, and Lisa and everyone who's been able to get me to speak with you today, put me in a position to be able to. I'm delighted to be here. I'd just like to say I didn't realize in Zoom that you could do backdrops. This was something Lisa and I learned yesterday. I love my backdrop. Just to say that this is one of my pictures that I kind of photoshopped, if you want to say that. But I think it's really lovely, and that makes me even happier to be here. My very first experience with cannabis, well, let's see. I have to harken back, a long time. I mean, this is somewhere near the dark ages, I think. I was a college student. I wasn't one of those people that used cannabis when they were in grade school, middle school, or high school. It was college, and my husband now, and I was going to save that for later. But my husband now and his roommate wanted to take me out on what's called then a fry run. And back then, Delaware County, Ohio, was under construction. The dam project that's now been there for probably almost 50 years was under construction. So we just to go out there, and they wanted to get me high and smoke marijuana. And so that was my very first experience. And I usually tell that story without spilling the front, that was my husband that I went out the first time smoking marijuana with, but that was what it was. And so, like I say, since then we've been married for 43 years. We have a 34-year-old son, and so that was my inauguration, if you want to say that. But I think before that particular event, not long before it, in early 1970s, a book was published called The Greening of America. And you look it up. It's Time was a rather famous and groundbreaking book. And it talked about things that we're really familiar with today in terms of green in America, local farming, and of course, marijuana legalization. I read that cover to cover several times, and it kind of, I think, cast me in this direction of cannabis reform. So my interest goes all the way back almost 50 years now to when I was in college. And then it evolved considerably from then. Now, if you would have told me back then, you're going to make a career out of legalizing marijuana, I would have told you you're crazy. Mm-hmm. But I was telling Lisa the other day, I think every point you make on your career, you may think you're in some kind of a vocation you just have to be there. You landed there and you don't know why, and you have to stick with it. You know, you maybe not even liked it. You'll reflect back many years from now and say, look, what I learned from that experience is absolutely essential to what I do today. So, count everything you doing and have done in your life as a step to where you are now.
Awesome. So let's talk about your first actual journey into, the cannabis industry and what led you to where you are today. What was the first thing you got involved in?
Well, I was actually a member of Ohio Normal back in probably the late 1970s, I'd say. There was a normal chapter that was formed out of Southern Ohio. I don't think I ever went to a meeting, but I was on all of their lists. I got their newsletter, and I probably have a box somewhere where I've saved all that if somebody wants it for an archive. So I was kind of, like I say, brushing with it back then. But in the early 1980s, I went to work for a pharmaceutical industry. Yes, big, bad, big pharma. I worked for big, bad, big pharma for 9 years. Again, this was a very important step along my path because I learned, I was never much of a druggie, people who did drugs were not me, but I learned about all kinds of things. I won't say everything there is to know about drugs, that would be a big stretch. But when you're looking at the international pharmaceutical industry, all the different products, all the dynamics of the way that works, the clinical trial process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that helps me today understand the political dynamics behind cannabis, the Controlled Substances Act and things like that. That was my first experience with drugs. It was 9 years as a market analyst in Big Pharma. So when the company folded, it merged, I think it's ultimately Pfizer now. But when that happened, I think I spent a time trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. My son was young enough where I wanted desperately to be a stay-at-home mom. I was willing to make all the sacrifices I needed to do that. And so that includes doing without a pharmaceutical level income. They paid real well. I think kind of my millennial thing, I came into the new millennium thinking that I wanted to change the world. And I thought I could. I think I did. And so that was when I got interested in seeing what the organizations were out there that would take me. I have an MBA, I have a pedigree like that. So I would probably thought, at least anyway, that, I would be hireable, if you want to call it that. And so I sent a letter to Normal, National Normal, and I sent a letter to Mark Greer with Drug Sense Map. Mark Greer answered me right away, and he wanted me on staff. I never heard from Normal, ever. And so that's how my path began. Now in its day, Drug Sense Map, an app standard for the Media Awareness Project. We had the concept, this is before the internet was, well, let's say before the internet as we know it now, because the internet did exist back then. But as we know, we've got Facebook, we've got all kinds of social media where everything's very visual. But back then, you mostly had email and websites. And our germination thing was, we believed we could affect the press coverage of cannabis because it was always getting panned in the media, by collecting all the news articles we possibly could. We built our archive to about 250,000 to serve as research. So anytime you wanted to find accurate, fact-based information, you could come to us and find it. And that really built our organization back in the early part of this century, really. Let's say that's from 2000, 2010. And we won all kinds of awards. We won Normal's, Organization of the Year Award, and SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, the Drug Policy Alliance. And the process during that time, because what I knew prior, again, this is a stepping stone thing, I was able to get in on the ground floor of grant writing. And so for a long time there, I was writing pretty major grants. And because I think one of the brilliant things that Peter Lewis and George Soros figured out, because they're the funders of those organizations, was grassroots organizations need to have money to work with. So both MPP, the Marijuana Policy Project, and the Drug Policy Alliance created grants programs. And to this day, I'm probably their most prolific grant writer. I think I've written something like 41 grants to the tune of, I say, 1.3 million.
Wow.
And so that's kind of how I got, this is kind of my national focus, all right? And I could go on. I think you answered kind of the germination questions there, so I'm going to stop there and then let you continue, and then I could go on, I'll go on and on if you want me to.
Yeah, I would like to hear a little bit more about, as far as you started writing grants. When you say writing grants, explain to them what type of grants you're talking about. Were they cannabis related? And what led you to, from that step of grant writing, into advocacy and policy?
Right. The grants, like I say, I thought it was a bill. Yeah, if you don't know who George Soros, and I think everybody probably knows who George Soros is, but nowadays I think memories are fading as to who Peter Lewis was. Both are billionaires, and both had a profoundly strong interest in reforming drug policy. And so they wisely, and I think this is important to note, because we don't really have as much of that now with advocacy as we did almost 20 years ago. And so they were funding organizations to tune of, I wrote grants, individual sums for like $50,000, and so that was very helpful, because I think one of the hardest things that nonprofits do, or really anybody, even if you're a for-profit, is raising money. And unfortunately, money is important if you want to get things done. I think much of cannabis reform has been done for free, and you fortunately had people who had the time or the energy or the desperation to engage in this business, to start out for nothing, virtually nothing. And so, like I say, these two individuals realized that money was important. Sorry about that, but it is. So they created these grants programs, and I was fortunate to get in on the ground floor of that. And that persisted for about 10 years until Peter Lewis's death in 2013. Of course, that's when the MPP grants program went away. DPA continues theirs, and I've been writing grants for one individual since 2002, I think it was. So about 18 different grants for this one individual, which counts as the number of grants that I've done, but it's still numbering up to 41 now. But in terms of your question, you're asking about advocacy. I'm a serial multitasker. I have probably 10 projects going at once. That's just how my brain thinks. I appreciate a lot of activity, and I'm able to compartmentalize things well enough so that I can give one thing my full attention, then switch gears, and then give another thing my full attention. And so during the same time as I started with Drug Sense MAP, I also wanted to work in Ohio reform. I was thinking about that earlier today in terms of what was my motivation to get involved in Ohio. And I want to go back to 1997. And there was a bill or a budget, something like that, the year before, it'd be 1996, that came through the Ohio legislature. And it excluded certain provisions so that it enabled a medical necessity defense. If you don't know what that is a defense that can be used in a court of law to say I did something like use marijuana to treat my MS, and it's considered, can be entered to a court of law as a reason why you broke it, okay? Now, it's been a controversy that the medical necessity defense, we could go to its evolution. I think it's pretty much a thing of the past with regard to marijuana specifically right now. But back then it was a huge deal. And so the legislature, unfortunately, the Senate, found out that this provision was in there that essentially would give marijuana patients a get out of jail free card. They saw it. And so they passed SB 2. The first act of the legislature in 1997 was to screw medical marijuana patients. Think about that. If you go to the Ohio Rights Group's website, there is actually linked there to the testimony, and you'd be shocked. You'd be absolutely shocked in today's climate. And you can listen to it there if you want to. I think it's still working. I haven't checked it recently, but I put it there a few years back. So the first act of the legislature in 1997 was to repeal SB, with SB 2, was to repeal the medical necessity defense. And I wasn't part of the movement at the time. I was observing it kind of in the observer's point of view. But what just kind of emblazoned upon my brain was I saw these medical marijuana patients in wheelchairs with crutches and canes huddled underneath this overhang of this one downtown, I live in Columbus, one of these downtown buildings, you know, for a press conference after this, this repeal. And they just looked so sad. I thought, these people look so sad. How can the state possibly justify putting these people at risk, leaving them out in the rain on a cold winter day? That kicked up my interest in advocacy. That was a pivot point for me. Okay, so then in 2000 and 2001, and the fact that I had the same interest in working nationally with Drug Sense, we were a national international organization. I did the same in Ohio, and I co-founded the Ohio Patient Network, which I was with until I think 2009, change that, 2009. And through that organization, we started, we got an MPP grant, okay? We started lobbying at the State House. We made some connections with some big time lobby firms and things like that. So that's kind of where the engine got going in Ohio, almost really 2 decades ago.
That's awesome. There's
Can we keep going?
There's a lot of history going on there, and I'm sure you could. We have quite a few people here that are interested in advocacy, so I'm sure that we'll put your information in our link on the news feed. So if anybody has any questions, they could maybe personally email you. Would that be okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, perfect.
Sure.
So I guess after your activism, it appears that you've always been an artist. So tell me a little bit about your artwork and how it has also been influenced by the cannabis industry.
Well, I'm going to try to continue with my story here, because sure. the advocacy, as I said, I formed the Ohio Patient Network. We saw that legislation was going nowhere with the state of Ohio. It was a dead end, and so then, like I said, I put the Ohio Patient Network in the past, and I formed what's now the Ohio Rights Group in 2010. Now, we had to go through a couple of name changes. I can go into those stories as well, but suffice it to say, I formed the Ohio Rights Group in 2010. Mm-hmm. And what we did, we just decided, well, we're going to form this group. We're going to put out a shingle and say, hey, we're open for business for ballot issues. Come to us if you want to help write one and run one. We didn't know what we were doing. I was so shocked at how much we didn't know about what we were doing and what it really takes to do a ballot issue. At the time, we just didn't know that, but we forged ahead anyway. And so people did come to us. Actually, a number of people came to us, so that in 2013, we launched the Ohio Rights Group, because we had to change our name. We've wrote what's called the Ohio Cannabis Rights Amendment. Mm-hmm. And we, about on May 17th, something like that, 2013, I was certified for signature gathering. You have to go through a process to be able to collect signatures for a ballot issue, but we were certified to collect those signatures in May of 2017, and it just took off like a rocket. I think we were just shocked. We had like 3,000 people come to us within a week, We were going, oh my God. It really was like sitting on the top of a rocket ship. And so there's a whole, like, a number of stories I could tell here, but suffice to say, our biggest obstacle was the money that it takes to mm-hmm. do a ballot issue, to get on the ballot. We saw for the last go around, I think, with the one that was involved Mark Zuckerberg, it was about 2 years ago, for kind of a treatment versus incarceration. They spent and lost at least $20 million. And that's what it takes, folks. That's what it takes to do a ballot issue nowadays. Is 20 million, if not way, way more than that. We didn't know that at the So what we had to do then, when we didn't get $20 million, we had to switch gears, and there were another number of other ballot issues that were going on in the background at that time. They're certainly worth a discussion. But if you want to talk about my evolution, I turned my attention back to the legislature in 2016 and helped marshal through HB 523. I testified before the House, Senate, and they had a task force. I testified there, attended every single one of the task force hearings. And so the ultimate culmination there was the passage of HB 523. Again, May's a magic month for us here. It passed in May in 2016. Now, in my little brain, I thought, well, you know, I'm old enough now. I achieved my goal of making medical marijuana legal in the state of Ohio. I'm going to retire. And when I retire, I promised myself years and years ago, I was going to go back to being an artist. My undergrad is in art and psychology, so I have an artistic background to begin with, and I'm just one of those creative persons that can do that kind of stuff. So I was going to switch gears and become an artist, and that's what you see now in my website, cannabinart.com, and things like that. But to think that I've given up advocacy, Now, I'm still working on education. I'm still working on, I think now my focus is, although it's still an advocacy framework, is philanthropy. I want the industry to learn how to pay forward and give back to, like I say, those people, for example, who were standing underneath that portico in 1997 in the rain. Those are the people that started our movement. That's where the grounding is. I want the industry to understand that, and I want them to be charitable in their outlook as much as they possibly can be, you know, going forward into a new world. Who knows what this is going to look like post-COVID. I want them to be looking at it from a charitable lens going forward.
And I see you're also a journalist. So tell us a little bit about what type of journalism and what topics you generally cover when you're writing, and what articles, where are they published?
Right. I've been, I just wear so many hats here, don't I? I've been a staff writer for the Columbus Free Press. My first article was published in 2002. And I think it was one of my seminal works. It was called Chemical Bigotry. Because cannabis did also come out of, in part, no small part, the African-American community has been hugely influential on it. But nonetheless, with drug testing, once they figured out how to do drug testing, it really became a discrimination against cannabis consumers. And, you know, we could be deprived any number of our rights. Housing, for one, you know, if you're in Section 8 housing, bam, you're out of it. Your job could depend upon a drug test. This seems so unfair to me. And now, particularly since we know the importance of the endocannabinoid system, it's like this is unconscionable that we would discriminate with this way. So anyway, I caught on to this early on in 2002 with the publication of one of my best essays, I think, which was called Chemical Bigotry. After that point, and I don't know how, I didn't write, you know, every single month, but I contributed a huge number of articles to the Free Press, some 50, I think I've counted now. I'm trying to archive them all, so I have them all in one place and can remember actually what I wrote about, because I've written about so many topics. And so what type of topics do I write about? I've been writing recently about the industry. I've written a number of projects where I talk about the crazy dosing, you know, that we had in the program.
Right.
I've talked about, you know, how to get a car, some of the more elemental things like that. I've written about banking, and we've had serious issues with banking, like many organizations have, where the High Rights Group did. So, excuse me, I'll put my glasses on my nose. So I've written about banking. It just, I guess, I try to be in tune with what the issues are of the moment and write about those. Mm-hmm. And I like to say, I don't try to write my articles. I'm writing a monthly column right now called Mary Jane's Guide. So I'm kind of expected to submit an article every month. And I like doing the work because it keeps me in the game. but I try to wait to do that till about a week before my deadline, so my articles are fresh. So I can tell you right now when I'm thinking about writing, but I'm not in that week before the deadline mode to say, oh my goodness, this popped up and I've got to cover this topic right now.
Awesome. So we do have a presentation that MJ has brought, but before I actually start sharing that presentation, I wanted to open it up. I know Bridget might have a couple of things she wanted to ask her. Bridget, are you still there?
Hello, hi everybody, how are you? So, okay, so Mary Jane, you know, I could just talk to you forever. Like I have a trillion questions every time you speak. So it's more like what do I want to talk about today? And I have a dozen questions. My first question is your thoughts about women in the industry. And where are we and how can we cement our place? And I'm just like you, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
It's interesting because I think women, I'm looking back in my history here book, going back to 1997 when I'm seeing the things like that, and women have been absolutely instrumental in this, if not the majority of many of the organizations I've worked in. What have I formed? Something like 3, 4, 5 organizations or worked for them. And they've been largely led by women. Women have been integral to them, whether they're performing social media functions, whether they're testifying, whether they're writing. The things that make not there. I have a couple of female attorneys I'm working with who help with organizational structure and things like that. So women have been integral to this. Do they get their fair recognition? They do not. And is it evenly spread? Because one of these things, like I've sort of noticed this one thing recently, they're trying to honor a bunch of women, probably for Mother's Day, who are in the industry. And I look through the list and say, wait, so-and-so's missing, so-and-so's missing. And women are this very inclusive type of people. We don't like to see people left out.
Right.
So take a little bit of umbrage with that, but I want to make sure that people like you, Bridget, and other people that are on this journey with me get their fair recognition. So I'm working on a little mini project on that subject matter right now.
Very good. So why do you think the industry is so interesting for women? Like, why do you think that we've kind of stepped up and honed in on this?
I think it was back in the earlier days, it was easy to enter. Now we have actual industry whereby you have to have qualifications, you have to go into school, different things like that. But back in the early days, you didn't have. It was like and it's sometimes it doesn't work out real well. You get warm bodies in there who are not qualified for what they're doing and make mistakes. But nonetheless, it was easy. There were no real barriers to enter it. So I think that was one of the things that got women involved early on. And there was always a need with nonprofits. There's always a need for people. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where you can have too many people. It's always a struggle to get people. It's always a struggle to get funding. And I think women were more inclined to volunteer for this type of work than men were.
Yeah, and it's a volunteer, like you said, that so much has been done for free, right?
Yeah, I would tell you this: if it wasn't, if you subtracted out, if we was about the money and paychecks and things like that, we wouldn't have a marijuana industry. Because like I said earlier, George Soros and Peter Lewis recognized early on that it takes at least a little bit of money, and it's really unfair that we don't pay people, but we wanted it so badly that we were willing to set that aside. So yeah, and for volunteerism, it's a great way to get a start with a nonprofit, but also nonprofits, they're essential, but they're very hard to fund.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question I have for you is, it seems like you always follow your bliss, that you're always in a space of making sure that you are staying true to yourself. What do you think it takes for the students? What do you think it takes to be an advocate or even a lobbyist? Like what what do you have to have internally to be able to do this type of work?
Well, in my case, I guess I came into the movement with a lot of tools. You know, I had the MBA, I had a college education, I know how to write. You know, those things I already had. I think that was very helpful to get for me to be able to see what needed to be done and then do it. Mm-hmm. I would, if you want to be a writer, of course, you have to know how. If you like to write for the Free Press, for example, you have to know how to write. You don't have to go to journalism school to do that, but because I know plenty of writers brilliant writers who, don't have college educations. But you have to have, I guess, that one person, a mentor or something that believes in you enough and says, okay, go ahead and do this. Go ahead and do this. Nonprofit's really the ideal place to test those waters if you're able to do that for not much money, because you can you can build your resume by doing nonprofit projects that are useful. As I said, everything's a stepping stone that you'll use later on in life, and they're a great stepping stone to that next place.
So that's a really great point that you're making, that if you don't necessarily have experience or the education in that area, that a nonprofit's a good place. They're looking for busy bees, right? They're looking for people to get in there and get their
talent. We're looking for talent.
Right.
And, you might have the mom who's a stay-at-home mom. I got to stay at home with my kids. But, she's got certain talents that, even the organizational, my goodness, with kids, the organizational talents of being a mom, you can run the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I don't know I have a dozen more questions, but
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. Oh,
I'm happy to help.
Plenty of time. So
yeah. I was like, I could just go on. So what do you think, like, you're so humble in what you've created. Like you're just so gracious about it. What do you think of our current movement? Like, how would you define where we are now and who those leaders are and what that looks like?
First of all, let me say this. I've had the journey, like I said, it's been a 20, 30, 40-year journey to where we are now with cannabis. And I know a lot of people complain about the program, but I look at it and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, here we are in the middle of a sadly tragic pandemic. And yet now cannabis is essential. And I think that the wisdom, I think, there was that the legislature, and we complained about, we thought this is too restricted, but they put it under the pharmacy board. Because it's under the pharmacy board and all other medications, all the big pharma are essential drugs. Now, because of that, cannabis is essential in Ohio. My mind is blown, and I could see why I did what I did, because I know that during this dire crisis, the patients are getting their medicine. And I'm so gratified. Humbled by that, I guess, really, and maybe some of my humble attitude comes from that, just powerful knowing that as that journey, no matter how difficult it was, here I am, I'm sitting on kind of the pinnacle of it, looking down on the valley going, wow, that was good.
That's fantastic. And so when people complain about the program, like, what would you like to see happen? We always talk about recreational, and I think for some people they see it as a free-for-all, but in the reality, there's nothing that's a free-for-all. So when you look at how things move ahead, what do you hope to happen?
I think there's a lot of good things, but like I said earlier, I think it's probably because I'm an old lady now. I think all old ladies do this. They look back in their lives and say, okay, now's my time to be philanthropic. Here I am in my, latter part of the second decade, second century of my life. No, 50 years, whatever that is, of my life. You want to make a difference in the world. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, where my head is at now. And I want to see, as I said earlier, the industry to understand its roots and where it came from, and how it came to be here. It wasn't because everybody went out and researched a drug, got a patent, formed a marketing department, marketed the crap out of it, sold it on television. That's not the germination here. The germination here is with, again, those people that were standing under that overhang in 1997. That's where it started. That's who we're trying, what the change I was trying to engender. And I want the industry to understand the base on which it rests.
Yeah.
And in so doing, I want the industry to take a charitable outlook going forward. There's so much that cannabis can do, from, of course, being a medicine. I'll just step back a second here. I did an analysis when this COVID things happened. One of my articles, I took a look and I said, what are going to be the fallouts from this? Mm-hmm. And I said, there's going to be two. Number one is going to be hunger. And number two is going to be mental health. And cannabis can play a significant role in both of those. Mm-hmm. With regard to mental health, which I think is just really, really critical, we're talking about adding the conditions to the list of anxiety, depression, and opioid abuse. Those should be added immediately, so that those patients are covered now and can get cannabis as an alternative medicine, both pharmaceuticals and, of course, to the treatment of the anxiety and the depression. I would rather see somebody, everybody would see somebody using a lot of cannabis as opposed to committing suicide. And we're at that pivot point, I think, with many people over this, that this fallout can be so emotionally devastating for a number of different dimensions. We've got to take care of that, and I think cannabis can be instrumental in that. The second part of it, I think, is hunger. We're seeing food banks, runs on food banks. What is it? Their usage has increased, double, triple after the COVID crisis. We need to address that. I think the industry can address that. I think, Bridget, you're instrumental in creating the Cannabis Can organization to promote donations to food drives. You were doing canned goods last December, and has to be online now. But I think hunger is important there. And the other flip side of the hunger issue is flipping over to hemp. Hemp is seeds, and the product of the hemp plant can it's highly nutritious if we produce hemp fields across the state of Ohio. Again, I don't want to overspeak myself here, because hemp's less of my area of expertise than medical cannabis is, but I do believe that we can use cannabis products to feed people, and we won't have to go to China for that and risk bringing back bad products, contaminated products. We could do it right here in the state of Ohio. And the final comment I make here, we can understand that every single product sold by a dispensary is Ohio grown and Ohio sold. I think that's a really important point.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Lisa, you were gonna show the slides. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and find her slideshow here, and we'll get that up. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I guess there we go. You want to start your presentation now, MJ?
Sure. This was a presentation I created for nurses. There were retired nurses affiliated with Ohio Health, and I wasn't quite sure what level of education they had, so I kind of started making it kind of basic, and it gets into a little bit more technical details, and maybe we need a medical focus for some of it. But this was created a couple years ago, so it's slightly dated. But the goals, this is based upon what I was trying to kind of metaphorically describe was a journey based upon the dead tune. There's a road, a civil highway between the dawn and the dark of night. That's from a Grateful Dead song. And, weaving that in here, this is kind of taking a road trip, if you want to call it that, through various points of the evolution of cannabis, okay? So this is the goals of it, which you're seeing here in this first slide, which we'll get back to at the end to see how well it's done. But these are the first goals of the presentation: to gain appreciative history. Sorry, folks, you may not like the history classes you took in high school, but they're essential in understanding the future. If you don't understand the history of the past, you're going to make the same darn mistakes in the future. That's kind of how the metaphor goes. And you want to understand how we got there. This kind of covered that a little bit of what I've already talked about. And I wanted to tell these nurses that we're entering a new era of medical treatment. And this is, I think cannabis is going to be a focal point of that. It's a medicine of the people. It's not concocted. You could certainly use the laboratories to refine it, make product, test it. That's absolutely fine. But it's a new area of medicine whereby it's began with advocacy by the people, but it's grown by the people, consumed by the people, not really far from where the people actually live and reside. So that's kind of the thing going there.
So MJ,
I don't have the ability to advance it, so there.
Hey, MJ, I'm curious because I'm always trying to figure out where do you see nursing fitting into the cannabis industry? Like what is your hope for nursing?
Nursing? Nurses are instrumental in this because nurses care for patients in ways that doctors can be criticized for not you, Bridget. Of course, you're wonderful. You listen very carefully to people, but a lot of doctors, it's a revolving door, and the nurse, is the person you actually interact with for your treatment. Okay, nurses have been historically more open to cannabis than doctors have, and I think it's because of their one-to-one relationships with patients, where they've been able to hear the stories and understand where the patients are coming from, where I think the doctors are more aloof from that. Over the course of my career here, I've worked with a lot of nurses, and they're really very good advocates for this, and they do also bring a sense of professionalism to what they say.
Absolutely.
This is just basically the preparation for the trip. You need to know the basics of cannabis. I'm sure the students here know all of this stuff probably well more than I do. And so it's kind of the standard stuff that, what is cannabis, what constructs cannabis, what are cannabinoids and things like that. That was the purpose of this slide. And basically nobody can really overdose on cannabis. It's virtually impossible to do that, at least in its natural form. And the endocannabinoid system, I'm sure Bridget can speak to this well better than I can, but I've pulled this stuff from the sources. I think you'll see most of my slides have their sources at the bottom. So if you're interested in figuring out where I got this information, it's scientifically pulled from the internet. Ancient history, yeah, this is amazing because, again, cannabis is not like, again, big pharma. It wasn't concocted in a lab 10 years ago. This is stuff that's been with us really since mankind's been on this, been a thing on this planet. And I think 20,000 years ago is a pretty darn long time. We're going back to China, we're going back to Egypt, to this ancient Egypt. We're going back to then crossing into this millennium, the Spanish, Shakespeare, and of course Jamestown. This has been a thread through our existence for a long time. This is very interesting because Ohio played a big role in kind of the resurgence of cannabis during the mid part of the 1800s. This is kind of a renaissance, I kind of called it, because these British and other doctors and scientists at the time were traveling around the world and finding that cannabis was being used in places like India and even France and places like that. I think they brought it back from India to France to England. And one of the most interesting parts of it was the report from the High State Committee on Cannabis Indica. This was there's a place there's White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, but there's also White Sulphur Springs, Ohio. And this is a report that was presented to the Medical Society at the time. about the benefits of cannabis. And you read this thing, and it so resonates with today. It was amazing that you can see we lost 100 years of science with prohibition. And of course, this 1889 article showed how, in the Lancet, showed how cannabis could be used for opiate withdrawal. We're still trying to convince the state of Ohio to put it as a qualifying condition. And good old prohibition. If you don't recognize that picture, that's from the movie Reefer Madness. And so Reefer Madness, as laughingly silly as it seems now, was pivotal to changing the attitudes about cannabis in the 1930s. And it ushered in the Marijuana Tax Act, which was seemed toothless at the time. You had forcing producers to pay a non-existent tax, which actually incriminated them. I believe the Marijuana Tax Act was ultimately ruled unconstitutional in the 1970s. But unfortunately, this wave of hysteria caused the marijuana to be removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia in 1942. And then further to that, there was a guy named Harry Anslinger, who was commissioner of the narcotics. I'm going to goof up exactly what the name of his agency was, but he was the one that kind of spearheaded this. Prohibition was ending in early 1930s, and it left kind of a vacuum for the prohibitions to have anything to do. And so he kind of invented this hysteria against cannabis, kind of partnered with what's his name, who was the Hearst, who was a newspaper publisher, and they published all these stories that demonized marijuana. And so this kind of snowballed, all right, into the 1961 Single Convention Treaty, which was basically constructed by Harry Anslinger to thwart cannabis, marijuana. So that is actually really being debated today. There was recently a thing about that said the DEA was not obeying the Single Convention Treaty of 1961 and how it was handling the legalization of cannabis in the United States today. This was just a week ago. They're talking about this. That's been well over 60 years. Come on. And that created the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. This was ushered in, as we well know, by Richard Nixon. Marijuana got placed temporarily in Schedule I. The Schaefer Commission took a review in 1972, said marijuana should be declassified and should be regulated. Richard Nixon threw it in the trash, and we are dealing with the Controlled Substances Act again today. And the cannabis goes through its prohibitions, and then it goes through another renaissance. And that renaissance, I think, occurred, a re-renaissance, if you want to call it that, in the 1990s. The AIDS crisis, and I remember distinctly the AIDS crisis because I was with the pharmaceutical company at the time, and my job was to track the AIDS crisis. So I read the very first monthly reports from the CDC that tracked how this was rolling out in the early 1980s. And it was AIDS patients that led to the compassionate IND created in the 1980s and lasted until George Bush's administration in the 1990s, where it was kind of shelved. This guy named Irv Rosenfeld continues to this very day to receive a tin of 300 marijuana cigarettes from the National Institute of Drug Abuse. 300 marijuana cigarettes a month from them. So this is a program that they created for AIDS patients, but was ultimately disbanded by George Bush because there were too many AIDS patients at the time. Administrative Law Judge Francis Young affirmed in '88 that marijuana is the safest therapeutic substance known to man. You go on and on. There's Raphael Mechoulam, who discovered CB2 and CB1 receptors, Proposition 215, in 1996. Again, was written for the benefit of AIDS patients by a guy named Dennis Perrone, who was trying to care for his significant other who was dying of AIDS. The Institute of Medicine was a groundbreaking report. And Connaught versus Waters was a Supreme Court decision in 2002 that recognized the free speech rights of physicians to talk about their patients about their therapeutic needs without the intervention of the government. There's been many milestones. I think, like I said, this was done in 2018, I think. So I had them, there's like 33, 34 now states who have legalized medical marijuana. And there's CBD only. That's irrelevant now, because so long as it's under 0.3% THC, CBD is technically legal. They're trying to work that out now with the feds. The support for medical marijuana is virtually ubiquitous. You know, that now it's kind of close to the margin of error in about any poll. So I think just about everybody thinks that marijuana should be legal for medical use. These are some things, again, dated about the number of patients. I think I recently checked that I think we've got over 100,000 recommendations, some 60 to 70,000, I think almost 70,000 actual patients actually buying from the system. This is the stuff that's, I mean, this just puts a smile on my face. Feel so gratified that, you know, all that hard work that we went through for the last 20 years culminates in statistics like that. Let's see, too many people are still being arrested. And this is, of course, talking about the opioid crisis, which is taking really a backseat to the COVID.
So a question that I have for you, Mary Jane, you speak of it so fluidly, and that it was just, you know, just a position of passion, and that you just kind of flowed with what your heart was telling you. But what type of backlash did you experience, whether it was friends or family or work? You know, you started with a pharmaceutical company. Like, what type of backlash did you experience during the time that you were making these transitions and doing this work?
Okay, I'm going to be really honest with you. The big enemy of the movement is the movement itself. And it was reflected in 2015 when we were working very idealistically off of the Ohio Cannabis Rights Amendment. It was very inspirational, I think, you know, how we wrote it and framed it. And along comes Responsible Ohio in 2015 that was backed by a bunch of investors, you know, those $20 million people. And it was very controversial. We were more the idealists, and when they came to the fore, we vociferously opposed them, vociferously. And as the campaign started evolving through the summer of 2015, we kind of became to an epiphany. And it was based upon who we are, what we stand for matter. I was talking to you about this a little earlier. Maybe it's just me. I was in leadership, but I think it was more than us collectively in the Ohio Rights Group had to take a good hard look at why are we doing this work? You know, we talk about the patients. Is this real? We're just giving it lip service. And we concluded that, you know, this is about the patients. What we're doing was trying to make medical marijuana legal in the state of Ohio. Very simple, medical marijuana legal in the state of Ohio. What was the path towards doing this? Responsible Ohio, as controversial as it was, because everybody panned their model, they called it a monopoly, they were called every name in the book. And I have to say their campaign made some major stumbles. They screwed up miserably. But we had to make a decision about who we were. And so we decided that we're here for the patients. And therefore, we made a big 180, and we got a ton of crap for it. And we decided to endorse Responsible Ohio. And truth of the matter is, they had a provision in their ballot language that was really way better than HB 523. And of course, those guys were the ones who went on and, of course, lobbied for HB 523 as well. But we made a big 180, and we took a lot of heat for that. And we still take a lot of heat for it, to be honest with you. It's still a very divisive thing. Ballot issues can be very, very, very divisive. So at the end of the day, we came on board with Responsible Ohio. Like I say, they stumbled pretty badly on any number of fronts that I can go into, and I think people would find funny. But even funny, but we decided to support them all the way through to their defeat. They lost in 2015. They got walloped at the ballot box and lost, I think it was 35%, lost badly. Jimmy Gould stood up at the task force hearings in 2016. He said he was one of the backers of it. He says, "Hi, my name is Jimmy Gould, and I lost $20 million. And I thought, you know what? That's one of the most honest statements I've heard. You know, can you actually stand there and say, I lost $20 million? And so I think that was one of the most difficult things that we ever did. We had to stand on our principles. We had to stay on it, take a lot of crap for it, and do something very controversial. But when you do things for the right reasons, and you know in your heart of hearts that you've done that with all you could, then you'd have peace with that. And I look back now and I think that that was the absolute right thing for us to do, and I don't regret it for a minute.
I have the next slide up for you.
Okay. The federal obstacles are the Supremacy Clause, which basically says that the federal government supersedes federal rules, supersedes state rules. There is latitude there because the Constitution does defer a lot to the states, so there's a push-pull there, but the Supremacy Clause, in theory anyway, because marijuana is illegal at the federal level, it does spill down to the states. Let's see, going back to truly the Prohibition times and back to the Single Convention Treaty, they concentrated all of the growing of marijuana in the United States legally to a farm in Mississippi at the University of Mississippi. And what that meant, though, is that even today, for research projects, for the scientists who are trying to study what marijuana is, what, you know, all these very things about cannabinoids, they're getting marijuana. The only place they are allowed legally to get it is from the University of Mississippi, which is said to basically nowadays, by today's construct, be growing hemp. You know, very low in THC, stocky. You know, the researchers will tell you that, you know, I could go to a dispensary next door and buy cannabis that has no resemblance to the stuff that we're given from the University of Mississippi for our research. And that's the subject for a number of lawsuits that are ongoing right now. And it doesn't fit, cannabis doesn't fit neatly into the clinical trial process. So you have to find other ways of, you know, legalizing it, which I think I've got the course change here. The federal government cannot force the states, and that's why we have medical marijuana legal in 33 states. Federal government cannot come in and force us to force prohibition on us. This, the FAR amendment, it's controversial. I think it's still in the budgeting process, but it's kind of a ping pong ball that gets taken out one time, put in another, taken out one time, put in another. We'll see how that goes. Cole memo is gone. So there are three ways to change local laws is ballot initiatives, the statewide level, the legislature, and you can do this through local city ordinances. And this is where the marijuana laws in Ohio, they're still in place from what they were years ago. So it's pretty consistent in terms of what the penalties are. This is outside of the program. Home rule allows the municipalities to run their own ballot issues, essentially what home rule does. And this is back at the time I was talking about the ballot issues. We formed the Higher Rights Group in 2013. And to date, now this might be an incorrect total, but there's even been a couple of ballot issues submitted since I've written this. They have gotten certified, but in some cases they have not for the signature gathering. Most of the time it's the money that keeps people from being able to put something on the ballot and pass it. This is Responsible Ohio, I spoke about earlier. Ohioans for Medical Marijuana were there in 2016, and that was a fulcrum that forced the legislature to legalize because they knew that if they didn't do it, we would do it at the ballot box.
And I want to stop you there because I have a question for you, MJ. I saw an article just the other day where they're trying to because of COVID-19 and not being able to get the signatures, which are normally required face-to-face, they're trying to get an initiative to have online signatures so they can move forward with the next ballot, which is, I believe, trying to legalize cannabis. So what's your thoughts on the state moving on that?
Well, couple things on that. The procedures for that govern how ballot initiatives operate are in the Constitution. To change that to say that you can do this online would require a constitutional amendment. So that's going to be probably undoable. And so I did to change that. It's not going to work. Again, I come back to the you can get it on the ballot. If you can get your signatures, and you're probably going to spend probably close to $10 million nowadays to even get the signatures the old way, because the law forces you to every signature. The premise of it is that every signature collected on a ballot issue page, where they have the signature page, has to be witnessed by the circulator, and they sign off on that on the back of it, saying that they have witnessed every single signature, and they can technically be prosecuted as a felony if they lie about it. Some people have actually been prosecuted and are serving time for that. Believe it or not, that's true. So that's why it's probably not going to be able to be done online for that reason. And the obstacles now are really so high because of the expense of hiring. We tried the all volunteer way. We had 150,000 signatures, but we hit the wall essentially because we couldn't pay people for it. We would try to still be collecting volunteer signatures, and unfortunately, signatures, while they remain what's called evergreen forever, they're good forever. People move, people die, things like that. And so they begin to become stale over time. So you just can't say, well, I've got to collect my signatures over the next 10 years and submit it to, and then move forward to the ballot. Probably not. You'll have to collect. I think now the benchmark is it's 10% of those who voted in the last gubernatorial race. I think it's over 400,000 now for signatures collected. You have to collect double that because the invalids and the moves. So you're looking at 800,000 signatures. Over 10 years, those all become stale. So you're looking at probably 1 million signatures. The obstacles are so high, and therefore the costs to do that are so exorbitant. It's no longer for the ordinary citizen or the ordinary citizen group. It has to be done corporately. Those are the only people who've got that kind of money, and that's really what the intent was.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I went ahead and put up your next slide.
Okay. Yeah, this is, you covered me up here. At least I'm not seeing myself. That's me on the right-hand side in my testimony before the Ohio House in 2016.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, you have to, we went through a process, and we testified, and the legislation was passed in, the governor signed it June 9th, I think it was 2016. So it's been in existence for, well, what is that? For almost four years now. Isn't that nice? Isn't that cool?
Yes. All right.
This is, your students probably know this better than I do. And I was going to say one thing I would do is refer your students to my website. Maybe if you could send this to them, you could see pictures I've taken of some of the entities that I visited over the last couple of years. Well, a year and a half, I guess, to document the rollout of the program.
Okay. Do you want me to bring that up, or you want us to keep doing the slides here?
You can go on with the slides.
Okay.
There's not much left.
All right. Go crystal ball.
Right. This, of course, doesn't take into account the now essential status of the industry, nor does it take into account there is potential for cannabis to have a role in the treatment of the COVID. There's several researchers who are working on that, whether it's the antiviral properties itself, or whether it's to deal with some of the the side effects of the virus. I guess there's some people who have issues after they've recovered, you know, with memory and other side effects like that. So they actually have that going on right now. So I think that's very gratifying. I think that cannabis is going to be huge going forward. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of patients come to us for all the reasons I think I've discussed, both the local sourcing, you know, the treatment spectrum for it, and you know, the people like us who are getting older, and expense. I think pharmaceutical drugs are becoming inordinately expensive, but cannabis by comparison to pharmaceuticals is still less expensive and probably more effective for treatment of various conditions. And I think you're going to see those going forward. I think our industry, they projected it would be 25 billion by 2025. If we could take handcuffs off the industry, that's a subject of debate. I think it could be much larger than that. And you add hemp into that, and we're coming full circle to what I was reading about in 1970, which was the greening of America. Cancer, these nurses were very interested in cancer, so I put a little bit in there about cancer. It's been long used, cannabis has been long used as an antiemetic and anti-nauseant. There's a drug that was approved in the late 1970s called Marinol, which is synthetic THC suspended in sesame oil. And so now that was one of the principal treatments for nausea with cannabis, cancer has been. But as we evolve with CBD and with you know, some of the legal framework for cannabis, I think we're going to see an expansion in various uses of either cannabis as an anti-cancer agent itself, or to ameliorate the side effects of cancer or the drugs that are presently used to treat it. And opioids are the same way. We could just get the state of Ohio off the dime here and make opioid treatment, cannabis, an alternative to that. I can think of a couple friends of mine who died from opioid condition, and I know, you know, in honor of Sheena Moore, this one's for you.
Yeah, I personally myself actually know, not in this state, but in other states where they were addicted to opioids and used cannabinoid therapy to get off their opioids, and they are opioid free today. So it definitely it helps with the opioid addiction and can actually get them off the opioids. So thank you for putting that
Sure.
in.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of, I think, the final stop. Yeah, this is the virtual tour we were taking. You know, this is the last stop on it. And they're taking two important points here. One of them is the endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome, which could explain a lot of illnesses like MS and Crohn's disease, et cetera, because they might have a deficiency of one of the cannabinoids that's very important to that functioning. And this was identified by a doctor named Ethan Rousseau back almost 20 years ago. I think that's important to consider, that some of these treatments, we understand the endocannabinoid system now better, that we can see maybe those treatments moving towards a cannabis-based medicine. I know many MS patients are also cannabis users, just as an example. The entourage effect means that, you know, whereas Marinol, which was purified THC, might have been effective antiemetic, when you include the terpenes, when you include the other cannabinoids in with cannabis, the cannabis product that you're consuming, it would probably have a beneficial effect, be well beyond just taking the THC itself. And that's, as we well know, that's the entourage effect.
Right. Yes, and I know I teach in my course that I believe it was Dr. Russo that also stated that when we're talking about deficiency, that when we're born, we actually receive cannabinoids in our mother's breast milk. And that's the last
Yes.
time that's the last time you received cannabinoids with prohibition, that's where we started becoming deficient. And now, just what is it, 100 years later almost, we're bringing it back into the mainstream and trying to overcome these deficiencies now with, research on the endocannabinoid system, as well as, helping to treat some of these disorders that could possibly be because of the endocannabinoid deficiencies. So great presentation. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop share.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I want to try to bring up real quick before we let you go. I believe somewhere here I have your website. So give me a second here. Oh. Hold on here. I think I have to escape out of here. There we go. And then pull. Okay, now I can share my screen. I apologize for that. There we go. So let me expand.
There we go. That looks familiar.
There we go. So here is MJ's website, and I just wanted to, what's the best tab for me to hit so that we can show some things here?
If you could hit the tab that goes to the new industry, that'd be great. So you can scroll down a little bit and see the picture that was the doctor. Oh, there we go. This is what I wanted. Is everybody able to see this?
Yeah.
Excellent. Right. As I say, I'm a staff writer of the Free Press, and so I've talked to, every now and then I'll get contacted by these people, and I want to write about what the dosing is, and I'll be able to contact the dispensary and say, hey, help me here, and if I interpret what you're doing and what are your challenges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So every time I visit a dispensary, these are only in Central Ohio. Remember, I'm from Westerville, and so I'm dealing strictly with Central Ohio. I'd love to have the ones from Cleveland, with the exception of Rice. That was a different one. But have more. But unfortunately, I had a cultivator say, "Oh, I want you to come up and see me." I'm dying to tour your facility, and COVID hit. So I'm limited now on what I can visit, but I'm still on the trail. So this will evolve as we go on. A couple of these I think are real interesting. Terrasana, for example, on the left-hand side there, that was opening day. That was the first dispensary to open in the Columbus, Ohio area, and a friend of mine and I were there bright and early. It was freezing cold. It was horrible, but we managed to get to the door, and there's the door. That's a very interesting one. I want to point out the Rise. This was actually taken by a friend of mine who was at the time working for Rise. And, we were sharing photographs, and he said, here, take this one. And this is opening day. So I said, okay, fine. I'll make a good picture for you for opening day. So we made this picture, and it got out on social media. The pharmacy board saw it. They not only made the dispensary take it down, they made them take the sign down. This is the only way this dispensary could be seen from the street, because a lot of times they put these things in these nooks. They're not purposely visible to the public. And that one was Bloom, I think it was, Bloom Medicinals down there. We spent probably half an hour driving around trying to find that thing. Mm-hmm. Now here with Rise, they say, oh, we'll put up a freeway sign and we'll make it easier for people to find it. Pharmacy board made it take down the freeway sign. They were angry.
Yeah.
The rest of them, Bordon, I think you guys are familiar with Bordon and Ohio Green Technologies. Benny Leaves, we had a lovely tour of Benny Leaves. They're so great, such gracious people. That was obviously last winter because there's no leaves on the trees. But shout out to Benny Leaves for being just great people. Obviously, Bridget's office is on the left there. She has one of my drawings in her main room. I think not my drawings. She has actually. I do photography and drawings, but she's one of my photographs. Big thing. It's about 2 feet by 3 feet. Huge thing. In her waiting room, she said, MJ, my patients come here and see that, and they're you know, unraveling with anxiety, and it really has a calming effect. And I thought, that's what I want for my drawing. That's what I want for my work. I'm so gratified by that my painting or my drawing has had that effect on somebody who's in a period of distress, particularly right now. So thank you, Bridget, for that. No, she's not here right now. Thank you, Bridget, for allowing me to use your office as a display gallery for my work. The other one over there on the right-hand side is Joel Simmons. That's his Ohio Herbal Clinic. And then Julie Duran-Dixon down on the bottom left-hand side there, that's her office for the Ohio Hemp Cooperative, which is, again, starting to roll out the hemp program in Ohio. And we never want to leave hemp out of this discussion, because hemp is going to be integral to the two things that I was talking about, the fall off of the virus and one of those being hunger. So let's keep focusing on that and what hemp can do to change the world.
All right. Well, I just kind of wanted to show some of your cool designs real quick.
Sure.
Some of her artwork.
The one here, that's the one that's on the right there, at least I'm looking at it's on the right.
This one?
That's my self-portrait. I made that for myself for my birthday last year. I call it my self-portrait.
Awesome. Yeah, these are some beautiful, beautiful artwork. So I want to wrap this up by asking anyone in here if they have any questions for MJ before we end this session. Go ahead, Joel.
So, hello,
Yeah.
Mary Jane. I'm Joel Hatfield. Very, very nice to meet you. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for everything you've done for our state. I'm definitely grateful for everything you've done. It wasn't until January of this year that I was actually, I succumbed and I got my card, and it is such a liberating feeling to be able to go there and to pick up product now, as opposed to, you know, my 20 years as a manufacturer, as a machinist, where you definitely have to hide everything the whole time. You know, so it's been really liberating to have this, and I thank you for the work that you've done. I do have a couple of questions here. One, how do you feel about autism? Do you think autism should be considered for a qualified condition?
I think it's already been considered, but that was one of the ones I think made it through the last pass. I don't think the medical board has met and ruled on it or not. It seemed like it had the best chance of joining the list of qualifying conditions, because it's it's a medical board team that does that, had rejected depression, anxiety, and opioid addiction. But I think autism remained on the table.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for your time.
They have a marvelous, the autism people have a marvelous advocacy group. I'm not surprised. They do great work.
Okay. Anyone else before we go? Well, I just like to thank you, MJ. I've got your painting that right there that you were talking about, that's in Dr. Bridget's office, which is.
You click on it. You can click on it. Click on it. See if you can get a full bigger picture there. No, not that. No, you go into Green Harvest Health. There you go. Go back.
Okay.
I just want to show you the picture close up. You have to go back.
So can you see it now or not?
Now can you click on the image? Click on it. There you go. Click on it.
Okay, does it show? I clicked on it and now all these.
It didn't want to do what I wanted it to do. Okay, it quit. Now click on it here. Click on it, see if it'll do it here on this page to the left there.
There we go.
Yep.
Well, that's definitely calming.
There you go. Now, there you go.
Yeah.
This is called the Schoenmeyer Gardens. That is in Gambier, Ohio. That, you know where Kenyon College is. It's right next to Kenyon College. And this guy is, I'm not quite sure exactly what he did, but he and his wife took this property and turned it into this massive park. And he has these Japanese art, you know, those stone army guys that they found in a trench in China. I don't know what they call them. There's a term for them. He had 3 of them there that he imported from China. I'm like, oh my goodness, that must have cost a fortune.
Yeah.
So he has this whole place sculpted out and developed and nurtured based on kind of Oriental philosophies. And this is one of the lakes that he has there. I was lucky. It was a very kind of stormy, sunny day and got beautiful reflection in the pond. But if you have a chance, he only, I think, opens his gardens maybe once. I think for 2 weeks, I think it is in June. Other than that, it's close. And you go there and you're going to have an amazing experience walking through this place. It's, I don't think there's anything like it. And I've been to a lot of, parks like this. It's beautiful.
The whole community of Gambier is beautiful. My nephew just graduated from Kenyon, and I used to live in Gambier when I was a child. But if you get an opportunity to check out that park, the whole community is a fantastic place as well.
Did you know where this guy lives? Because it's called and I'm not pronouncing it correctly, Schnormeyer, I think it is, Gardens.
Yeah.
It's adjacent to Gambier. I don't think it's in Gambier.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's across the river. There's a river that runs through Gambier as well, Kokosing River. And I think it's across the river. Yeah. But it's beautiful. The whole area is a beautiful place.
Yes, it is.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Mary Jane. You were very insightful, and I just want to thank you, as Joel did, for everything you've done in our industry, for the state of Ohio, to bring us today where we are, and of course, educating others to keep the ball rolling is still so important. So we thank you for your time. I want to continue to keep in contact with you. I think you're a great source. And we just want to say thanks so much. And we will end this session, and we'll see you next Friday. Thanks a lot.
Thank you to Cleveland School of Cannabis and you, Lisa. Thank you so much. Joel and David and whoever else is here, Bridget, of course. Thank you for listening to me. And I wish you very much luck in your careers. And I hope to meet you sometimes. If you go to the advisory committee meetings, if they ever have those again, you might see me there and come up to me and say hi.
I will sure do that.
I definitely hope to meet you, and I'd like to stay in contact with you, and I'll reach out to you through email, Mary Jane.
Sounds good. Thanks. Good.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you.